Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for episode 20 of our bi-weekly series, Ask the Howlers. If you're tuning in for the first time, this is our cybersecurity roundtable where we typically cover different topics. And this week specifically, we're going to be focusing on threat detection and IR in the new threat landscape. These sessions are 30 minutes. We will record them and email you a copy along with show notes that we talk about throughout the session. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to head over to carbonblack.com/ask-the-howlers to grab the show notes and related resources. So with that being said, for those of you that do not know, my name is Stacia Tympanick, and I am a solution engineer over at VMware Carbon Black. Jared, I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself.
Sure, absolutely. My name is Jared Myers. I'm one of the technical leads and the managers for the threat analysis unit, and I'm over the Nation State and Advanced Tactics group. Scott?
Yeah, hi, and this is Scott Hanson. So I've been with Kroll for about 5 years now. I've been in the wider Carbon Black community, I guess, for a while. So before I came over to Kroll, I worked in a large oil and gas company and got early on, I guess, in the enterprise usage of EDR tools. So I've been a big fan ever since. But so I work day to day in incident response and also our long-term monitoring service, which we call Kroll Responder.
Awesome. Thank you both for joining us today. So we're going to dive right in. I've been in a lot of executive briefings lately, and the topic of supply chain attacks is obviously one that's really, really trendy. So I want to start with you, Scott. How do you think supply chain attacks are going to impact security strategies going forward, if at all?
Well, I think they have to, because I think, it's become over the last few years more prevalent, and, there's certainly, I would say, easier ways of getting into many organizations, and we'll probably talk about some of those, but, for higher order, security organizations that have taken time to invest in a lot of the basics of block and tackle, the supply chain route into a network may be, the best and only way for some advanced adversaries to be able to get through. So I think, understanding there's no perfect solution, right? There's no perfect way to protect yourself when it comes to trusted software doing trusted things, which usually takes the form of software updates or some kind of, expected patching cycle, and then something malicious comes through. I think, it does kind of put more emphasis on, again, once again, we're kind of in a detect and respond world. So organizations that you can't truly expect to prevent something supply chain side, just due to the nature of, how it works and how the trust relationships work. But you should, have, emphasis and security posture of, if one of these things did start to misbehave and if something started happening that was, beyond the norm for this application or these systems that are affected, how would I know it? And that's what people have to emphasize in things like their detect and respond program.
Yeah, I agree with what Scott said. I mean, I don't think that supply chain attacks are new necessarily. I mean, what occurred most recently, I think, has kind of garnered a lot of attention. So I think it'll become kind of a bigger part of some people's process just because of kind of the news cycle that's been around it now. But I mean, really, like, how are you going to make that part of your process, I think, is the bigger question. And I think from kind of the get-go, regardless of whether you're worried about supply chain compromised or contractors or third-party access to your organization, kind of the trust but verify approach is, I mean, been around for a while. So it's going to be hard to validate every single piece of software that you run inside of your organization, especially if it's a giant one. So kind of the key thing to that is how are we going to make sure that if any of this stuff starts behaving weirdly or badly, how do we kind of differentiate that? How do we have visibility across everything to say, we have the software and here on these couple of systems, it's doing some real weird stuff. And then kind of how do you respond to that? So I think it will change things, but I don't think that the answer is necessarily novel to how people have to address it either. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing that CISOs have been asking in these meetings is how do we validate, right, that our source code is indeed secure? What tips can you give us? And the other question they ask is, so should I stop trusting publishers if that's one way that I'm whitelisting things, if you will, whether it's for AV or if it's for application control? And so I'm curious, Jared, what would your answer to a question like that from CISO be?
I think solely using like publishers to trust things is a very risky move. I understand why a lot of organizations do it. Having kind of the manpower and the resources to go through every single thing and whitelist and blacklist can be time consuming. So you kind of get into this process of saying, well, anything from Microsoft is good or anything from whoever is good. Um, I think there needs to be a balance with kind of audits as part of that, whether it's internal or third party. If you're taking on some of those type of risk, are you ever making sure that you're looking into some of those things? And that's just one of those things. I mean, ultimately, it's a risk if you do that. It's not a giant risk, but it is an inherent risk that you do if you kind of whitelist things globally and say all of these are good because we trust the signer. You're just opening up kind of the attack. I wouldn't say that it's rare, but it doesn't just happen all the time either. I mean, certs get stolen, things get signed. This goes back a decade, that we've seen this. So I understand why people do it, but you just kind of have to be careful when you kind of implement those types of, like approaches to handling things. I think what's more concerning is when people do it based off of like noisy things. So like we run these applications in our system and they're noisy. Therefore, we're gonna just kind of say that all these are good. If they're run out of this directory, if they're signed by this person, that can get you into trouble very quickly. Just kind of making those very like broad strokes of a pen just to try to like tune out things. So like time spent like curating that is really like good in, good out is kind of a good method for that. If it was quick and easy, it was probably quick and easy for a reason, and like you may be opening up some potential vulnerabilities there to yourself.
Yeah, one even example that I see is if folks are running Chrome internally or allowing that as a something their employees can use. Their betas or updates typically come out on Sunday nights. And so they find themselves going in on Monday morning with all of these tickets in their support desk. And so, that's a situation where you have to analyze the cost, risk, benefit to trusting a cert overall. Scott, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just think, the good news to me is that although these supply chain attacks can go very far and wide, the actual targeting of organizations is much more limited than it might feel, right? Because it seems like, wow, in the news there were 80 bazillion organizations that were affected by a particular supply chain attack. But really, when it came down to the bad actors, going live, so to speak, or actually taking, real actions within a network, it was a very limited number. So it is usually enough for most, of the smaller businesses, small and medium businesses, and even larger organizations that they don't have a whole lot that they're terribly worried about from a compromise perspective. Just keeping up with security news, like these things do seem to eventually come out, and when they do, people go back and check, like, okay, what did we miss over the last 6 months or a year? Well, this might have been going on, but the reality is you may not, your organization just may not have been consequential enough. I know we don't want to hear that, but you may not be the most important victim out there. There's probably but those who work obviously in government and defense contractors and others, they have to take all of these much more extremely seriously, perhaps more to lose. But for the every organization, you won't ever have it. You really won't stand a chance of preventing it from happening. But if you detect and respond properly, then that's the best you can probably hope to do.
No, that's great. And so we see supply chain attacks obviously as a trendy topic. Another attack surface that's been trending is these VPN attacks. So Scott, I'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about the methods you're seeing being utilized within these attacks.
Yeah, I mean, let me count the ways. The VPN itself, it's such a great security control that we recommend every organization should have. But with the rush of work from home and COVID, people have, I think, rapidly deployed things without necessarily carefully examining how they're implemented or what's being exposed. So I think the most common that we've seen is variations on VPN session hijacking. So there's been multiple vendors, and I don't think we even have to name names, but over the last year, I can think of 4, major VPN vendors off the top of my head that have had significant remote code execution, session hijack execution. So, it's, of course, we're always worried about people obtaining credentials, and that still happens, but just simply VPNs out of patch, VPNs that have known high order vulnerabilities have led to a lot of incident response investigations for us. So it kind of runs that whole gamut of, somebody phished credentials and just simply use that to log into the VPN. They found the vulnerability, the system's out of patch. We've seen a couple situations where it was more of a true, 0-day situation where somebody's VPN was 100% patched and current, and yet somebody was still able to exploit something that later on became revealed as as yet unknown vulnerability. So it's just a very juicy way to get in. It makes the actor's life very easy if they can get in through a trusted mechanism like VPN. So it's definitely coming up, increasingly over this last year.
And Jared, are we seeing an uptick of that as well from a Carbon Black perspective?
Yes. I think if you kind of break it down into 2 like very large buckets, there's let's say like phishing or stolen compromised credentials, and then there's like RCEs and 0 days and like all the other types of things as well. So like the stolen credentials, especially since kind of we've had this like giant shift to work from home, has become very bad. For I think the reason that Scott pointed out was a lot of organizations were kind of very quick to try to set up additional things that they just have in place. So they may have had a small contingent of work from home before, but now they have to deal with the entire company. And they kind of set things up and then didn't go back and really like test them out or make sure that they were configured properly. So there's a lot of things that come out of that. If you're not using multi-factor authentication, I think Scott and I talk about this every time we see each other, like don't do that. Do use multi-factor anywhere and everywhere you can. It goes a long ways in kind of stopping that initial vector. And then after that, there's lots of ways to catch it. But if you can prevent it right there, it's one of those things you don't have to outrun the lion. You just have to be faster than the person next to you. So that's a big one right there. As far as like some of the RCEs, the session hijacking that Scott was talking about, I mean, there's been kind of a swath of that over the last year. I'm not sure if that's a chicken and the egg of whether or not those were targeted because we saw more people using VPN, or if it was just kind of luck, but they pop up. Ultimately, once they're kind of inside, that's kind of the first phase, the first wall. Like what are the additional walls and hurdles that you have in place that if they can get access via VPN or compromised credentials, whatever it is, that you can say this looks odd. Like these computers shouldn't be doing this, these tools shouldn't be running, whatever else. It's been around for years, like the defense in depth, but it's there for a reason. I mean, like, and all these things, all these small things add up to give you a very good posture, if you can, implement them in the right ways. So.
Yeah, we see it a lot where people will either grant, temporary creds or even just move machines into like a bypass status because they had to troubleshoot, and then we all forget to move it back, right? It's something that we try to push, at least I try to push with my customers, like try to leverage the APIs that, hey, every 24 hours, if something's in a policy and it shouldn't be there, it should be back, like automatically do that for me so that I don't have those forgetful situations. Same thing with credentials, right? And so it's just nature of being a human. You're never going to remember that, oh, I've done this at 6 a.m. this morning and I forgot that I haven't set them back. And another point that you brought up, Scott, which is that even scenarios where VPNs are up to date, they're still getting attacked. And so my question is this where you push, like, what's the answer? If even we're doing our best and we still cannot defend ourselves, is it cyber insurance? Is it EDR? Is it, just do our best and assume we're going to get breached? Like, what's the good way to approach it?
I think, it's one of those situations where you can start to get in this helpless mentality where it's like, it doesn't matter what I do, we're still going to get breached. Like, and that's been a lot of the mantra, even in the security industry, is assume breach, right? Assume compromise that's going to happen sooner or later. So I think a lot of that is true. there will never be, the perfect layers of defense that keep every single adversary out. But I think you're right. There's certainly, cyber insurance is helpful, in the event that you need to do an incident response, that can really be a huge mitigator just for the cost of the response itself and the cost of potential fallout in terms of, ransomware has obviously been the big vector for most of these VPN intrusions. So, I think it is, it's another advertisement, I guess, for having something like EDR in place, because it's just, what the way these investigations will usually occur is the lead that kind of tips it all off is somebody is moving around on, logging into systems that it seems inappropriate that they should log into from the VPN, and they show up on a domain controller, and there's no very good explanation for why this person is on this domain controller at this time, or why they're, accessing, restricted systems, of other types like ERP systems or, sensitive data systems. So it really is one of those, assume that they could get in and assume that you would need to have a plan in place to pay for it. And that might be insurance, or that might just be, proper budgeting. But then it's, from a technical perspective, having enough endpoint visibility to say, okay, perimeter stuff will happen. Endpoints are always going to be the place where the juicy data lives. So it is, once again, another place to detect and respond if you realize that there's a certain explicable pattern of things that most actors are going to have to do once inside, or they're going to have to enumerate things. They're going to have to usually cross the domain controller at some point, either to get credentials or to get a foothold into other systems. And, just carefully watching those key systems is about the best thing you can do.
Yeah, I agree with Scott there. I mean, a lot of incidences start off with, this can't happen. And then over time, it kind of morphs into this shouldn't have happened. Having, and this is not like a soft sell because I work for a vendor, but having visibility, whether it's logs or EDR, I mean, whatever it is the thing that helps you get to those answers very quickly. And that's what can tell you, we've had a small incident, or we've, potentially lost lots of records, whether it's PCI or PII, and, we have to make notifications, and kind of having some of those pieces together to kind of quickly determine exactly what did occur. What stakeholders do we have to answer to as far as what was compromised, what was potentially exposed. There's a wide difference between someone got in and, got onto a couple of systems and we lost a lot of other people's data. And those kind of look very different on the other side. So if you have that visibility to be able to kind of focus in and get those answers very quickly, I hate to say that things are going to happen, but to some extent, everybody's going to have little problems. I mean, if you've never been through life and had a fender bender, that's amazing. But at some point it happens. And that's why we wear our seat belts and have, airbags and all those kind of things. So.
Yeah, I'll even tell you an example that we had from one of our investigations this last year. The victim organization had been doing really well with their VPN logging. It was really cranked up to verbose, and it was giving, we could see kind of back, 6 months before the incident, there was this massive amount of rich data. And then there was about a month or two before the incident occurred, the fidelity of the log data just went down really badly. And it was almost nothing. It was just the very most minimal, somebody logged in, the IPs weren't evident. It didn't show the external IP nor the internal IP. And we're what happened? We're almost wondering, did the bad actor somehow take the time to reduce the logging? And they actually looked back through their change tickets and saw, oh, somebody looked in the syslog or the aggregator and thought that the VPN was taking up too much space. And so they turned off or turned down the logging to a very minimal amount. So we shoot ourselves in the foot, right? Because it's that I guarantee that was not the biggest data source or the thing to worry about, in terms of disk space or storage, but, just the human element is always there. So yes, the more points of logging you can keep verbose. And it's funny too, how people get in the habit of accepting even things like, multi-factor. We champion that all the time. We've had another case where an admin was so used to just accepting those push notifications that the actor actually logged in using their username and password, and they just saw their phone asking and they said, yep, sure. So we had this big, mystery of, did somebody, compromise the multi-factor vendor? This is crazy. And it's no, somebody just accidentally hit the button. So the human element is there, but, one or more of these controls will eventually catch up with people. So it's not, I never try to despair in these moments. It's just do what you can and hope that one of the layers of security will make up for other things that might've been oops, especially that human element.
Yeah, I see. I try to also remember like something's going to fail to all your points. Like something is going to not work the way it was supposed to or not be configured the way it's supposed to. And incorporating that into your tabletop exercises, I think, is important. There's tools out there, card games like backdoors and breaches, where you can get into this scenario. Well, you went to go check AD and oh man, this machine's not on the domain or something, right? And kind of put yourself into those scenarios so that you can critically think at a time when you're practicing, so that when this really happens, you at least know, if we can't get it from here, can we get it from somewhere else, or somehow make sure that this doesn't happen again going forward. So the last trend, and I only bring this up because if there was a conference today and it had an exhibit hall, I think I could bet that everything would say container security, because that is the marketing buzzword, if you will, for at least this month. And so I wanted to ask you guys, it seems like this is a new space. Even when I'm talking to some larger organizations, container security is still kind of in its infancy and trying to figure out, how do we approach this? What's the right way? And so when you think about the attack surface of workloads or containers, what do you see? Like, for instance, even container escape or VM escape attacks. Jared, I'll start with you.
Sure. And just kind of for like a quick primer, like containers have done, for like development and quick turnaround, what VMs did for like hardware systems before. Like you're able to kind of very quickly spin these up. Typically it's used with like larger orchestration type work. So, you have one, container that does one thing. It's very self-contained. You can move it around. If it gets overloaded, you can quickly spin up 10 or 100 or 1,000 of those same containers, kind of spread out the workload. In all the things that I just like boiled down into 30 seconds, there's actually 1,000 moving pieces. I don't think that container and kind of workload security are just that crazy, but it is different. And I think that's the biggest thing right now. I think a lot of people, and we've kind of always seen this, to where businesses move to things that make sense for business. And oftentimes security is kind of on the back end of that, of like, well, now that we're doing this thing, how do we make sure that it's secure, that, we're not doing these other things? I hope that organizations, as they're looking to containerizing more and more applications and things like that, that they're kind of thinking on the forefront, how are we actually going to address the security piece of this? Between the secure code itself, the images that you have, that are part of the orchestration, the registry pieces that go along with it, there's like 5 or 6 things that all need to kind of be monitored or scanned or looked at. And I think with some of your very traditional tools, let's look back a year or two, like it's harder to adequately do that with those old tools. I think a lot of organizations are coming online with platforms or products that are capable of kind of addressing these concerns. And you're really going to kind of need to lean into a lot of those to actually get the visibility that you want. If something were to occur, and I think a lot of what we're seeing now, and I'll preface that with, I don't know how many people are looking. So, us seeing things is a very small piece of the pie, probably. You see a lot of like malicious containers. So you can upload it, you can make a container, you can put something in it, you can upload it, and others can, use it kind of a turnkey solution. So I need, some web app that does this basic functionality that I can add my code to. And in the background, there may be some crypto miner that's just running, and it's not like stealing your data, but it's just kind of stealing your resources because you've deployed now 1,000 of these in AWS and your costs are running up. So maybe it's 10% on your costs that you could shave off by having visibility into some of these things. So I think it's something that, yes, I agree with you. It seems like everyone likes to throw, that's this spring's like buzzword, is containers and everything else. Obviously in the space that all of us work, what's attached to that is the security piece. So I think the biggest thing is kind of leaning into this and understanding that it is different enough that you can't approach it with the same methods that you did before. It's just not going to work like that. And as we're moving more and more stuff to the cloud, like you just have to take that into consideration. So for all those that have already jump started, putting containers everywhere, like take a pause and say, all right, now how are we making sure that we're securing this, that we're not losing money to things like, like our resources being eaten up. We're not enabling backdoors. We're not, like giving access to a container that is exploitable or vulnerable, which could then lead to some kind of escape to the back end host, which could then people use as a pivot point to, other data systems. There's a lot there. I'll be honest with you. And I think a lot of these pieces overlap, like once they get to the host, kind of the underlying layer where the containers are running, that's where some more like traditional things can pick up. But you still want to try to have that visibility and the visibility in the containers as well. So,
Scott, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, just in the security industry, like any other, we kind of have these periodic gold rushes where a new hot topic comes out and a new product space kind of needs to be filled. And I think I do take the segment seriously just because I see, many incredible vendors that are, seeing a problem here and looking to fill the space with better, just inherent security or better monitoring once something has been built. I can't say, from Tales from the Trenches perspective, I haven't seen a lot of investigations that really led us back through containers as such. There's cloud as a general topic for sure has been more likely to come up. It's like just strange things like, somebody deploys one or two boxes in Azure or Amazon and they put them, they make them a member of their domain, but they don't really secure, the access to those systems from the cloud perspective. So they're a little bit of a sitting duck that enables somebody to pivot in. So conceptually, I could certainly see why a container, something that's rapidly deployed, minimally configured, might exist, and sometimes the short duration of these things is almost what saves you as much as anything. So the container may only live for an hour. So even if it's poorly configured, there's almost no time for a scanner to get through and pick up some vulnerability and get a foothold there. So that may be, reasons why it just hasn't come up a lot in real world investigations that we've done. But, in concept, I think more and more people are getting to the idea that containers would benefit their organization, and they're probably less and less likely to take the time. Maybe some of the early adopters of things like this realize some of the risk and mitigate it. And maybe as it becomes a more mass scalable, solution, then your every Joe, user will start deploying containers, and that might, set up bad circumstances. So it's kind of like, when Amazon S3 became a big thing, we saw a lot of cases come out where, oops, we didn't configure our S3 bucket, and now somebody found all of our customer data. And that seems to have receded because that kind of got out in the wider world of like, yeah, that's a horrible thing to do. Like you can do these little security checks against your buckets to make sure they're not exposed. So I think containers might go through a similar, life cycle of it's been somewhat limited adoption, but the time is coming in which it may be more widespread. And then, this may be a better foothold for bad actors. So, as yet, not a lot to report, but I think, over time, I think the attention is probably warranted. Otherwise, I don't think all these major security companies would take the time to fill that space.
And we're starting to see like open source like red teaming tools as well. Like I know like Rhino Labs put one out. So I mean like this also isn't like an imaginary made up thing. I mean like there are actively problems. There are actively like good pen testers and red teamers that are out there trying to make sure that these vulnerabilities are done and doing their assessments. If they're doing it, then you can rest assured that it's because someone is maliciously doing kind of the same thing. And there is things that can be done, and it doesn't take much sometimes depending on the configuration, especially like the speed in which it goes up and down is a double-edged sword from the business standpoint and the security model. Hopefully, if something's wrong, it's not up long enough that it can really be that open. It's like leaving your car doors unlocked for an hour. But on the same chance, as quickly as things can get deployed, like that leaves like a lot of room for error, when you're running real fast and kind of building the bike as you're riding it, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see over this year how the market shifts and who ends up doing really well in terms of protecting containers and what approaches we start to see security teams actually take on when it comes to containers. So that is it. That's all we have for today. But I always, before we leave, I always like to do a bonus question. So the bonus question is, in spirit of it being wintertime, hot cocoa. Do you enjoy marshmallows with your hot cocoa or not? Scott, I'm going to start with you. No pressure.
Oh yeah, I'm a definite on the marshmallow. Yeah, that makes the whole enterprise worth it. So 2 thumbs up, marshmallow.
Oh, I use marshmallows, but not in the hot chocolate. I eat them separately and drink the hot chocolate. It's the whole thing, yeah.
Yes, that is, see, I told you, we always find a weirdo on the show.
Yep.
The hot cocoa bombs I have not tried yet, but that is also very trendy right now. So I will, if you want to just ship them to me or anything, anyone that's listening to this, I'd be open to accepting those. All right, guys, I appreciate you taking the time today and coming on, talking to us about the current